Hello everyone, welcome to Global Bizapps Day 2020 powered by Day 65 Champs. I'm Vivek Patil. Hope you all are doing well. It's been 24 hours. We have been started with this particular sessions. Today we have Hardit Bhatia with us. Hardit will be talking about A to Z, that is the 26 Power Apps tips. Hardit is an MVP for business applications, MCT, and a Power Apps community super user. Hardit is having 12 plus years of experience in the industry and working with the Hitachi Solutions America as a senior manager. Hardit holds the expertise in Power Apps, Power Platform, and Dynamics 365. So, welcome Hardit. Before I hand over the session to Hardit, I would like to mention that if you have any questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat window, and we will take it either during the session if possible or during the Q&A time. So thank you again for joining. Enjoy the session. Hardit, over to you.
Thanks, Vivek. And as we get the questions, feel free to stop me because if there's a question that's relevant to the tip that I'm on at that time, it would make more sense to answer that question then.
Sure. Noted.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So, welcome everyone to my session today. Um, Again, thanks to everybody who's attending the session. Thanks to the organizers for this beautiful event. And with that, let's get started. So, the session today is on Power Apps tips. It's some of them are pretty basic, some of them slightly more advanced. So the hope is that you, even if you know some of them, you hopefully don't know all of them. So we look at some cool stuff, some hidden properties that are not too common. So hopefully after this session, you will have more knowledge or have more information about some of the controls, some of the properties, which control should you use, and so on and so forth. With that, Vivek already introduced me, but here I am, Hardit Bhatia. I work for Hitachi Solutions. You can reach me on LinkedIn or Twitter. My Twitter handle is the Power Addict, and that's pretty much it. So before I move on to the next slide, just one cool thing, one small little cool thing. This that you see right here is actually a Power App, right? So if you see here, the URL is a Power App, and if I show you the studio, this is where the entire app is. So it's not a PowerPoint; it's actually a PowerPoint-like Power App, and we'll take a look at some of the cool things that you can do to a Power App to create something like this. Okay, with that, let's take a look at the agenda. There is no agenda. It's the last hour. We will straight away dive into the tips and have some fun. Okay, so let's start with the first one. Add picture control versus camera control. So if you ever want the ability for your users to add pictures through your app, there are two options that are available to you: the camera control and the add picture control. There are certain advantages of add picture control over camera control, which is what I will talk about. And because of those advantages, it's always advisable to use the add picture control. So let's take a look at these two controls now. There I am. This is the camera control on the left hand side, and there is the add picture control on the right hand side. So the first biggest difference, which may not be too apparent, is when you use the camera control, it doesn't capture images in full resolution. So if you want to test it out, create a Power App, create these two controls or add these two controls, click the same picture using the camera control and the add picture control, and then compare the resolutions once those images are stored, say in CDS. The ones using add picture are in full resolution. So if you have an awesome phone with an awesome camera, you will be able to take advantage of that using the add picture control, not with the camera control. Second advantage is add picture control lets you choose between two options. Do you want to click a new photo? Or B, do you want to upload an existing photo? Which on a phone makes sense because you might have clicked photos using your phone's camera, not necessarily when you are within the app. So if you've already taken pictures, it gives you a cool option of uploading those pictures from your gallery, and especially on desktop as well, right? Because on a desktop, the only option that is available to you is to upload images, which is why the add picture control is a good control that works on all devices. And then if you're worried about the fact that if you use the add picture control, you are basically making your users click more times than in the camera control. That's actually not true, because there is an option, there is a property for the add picture control, which is called use mobile camera. And if you set it to true, what that means is when this control is accessed in an app through your mobile device, when you tap on this control, it will open the camera by default. So you won't have to choose between taking a new picture or uploading an existing picture. So for those reasons, strongly suggest using the add picture control rather than a camera control. With that, let's move on to the next one, background image. So a lot of times we want to add certain images to a screen, to a canvas. And in some cases, we want to resize that image to be the exact same size of the entire screen. For example, a background image. And if that happens to be the case, there are two ways you can do it, right? One is like here, I'm going to go back here and show you. One is I can literally go to the media section, look for the image that I want to add, and I can click or drag that control, and then I can resize this image. So can I do it this way? Yes. But what's a better way to do it? A screen has a property called background image. And if you select an image from there, it covers the entire screen. Now, the advantage of doing it that way is you don't run into a possibility of accidentally resizing your image or accidentally repositioning your image, because you don't have access, so to speak, to that particular image which is used as the background image. So I can go here, play around, and not worry about, let's say I'm using this. I might accidentally either drag this image or resize it, and then it will distort the screen. So to prevent that, if you want an image to cover the entire screen, use the background image property of a screen and select the image that you want to use there rather than adding the image directly to your screen. Okay, moving on to the next one. This is one of my favorite battles, combo box versus dropdown. There are certain advantages of using a combo box over a dropdown, and we will take a look at those. Move on to the next screen. Okay, so here I have a dropdown, and then on the right hand side, I have a combo box. Few advantages of using a combo box, right? So if I click on a combo box, I can select multiple values. If I click on a drop down, I can only select one. So multi-select is an advantage of using a combo box. Second is I can actually search. So if I type in 3, it'll show me all the items that have 3 in their names. So I can then easily select item 13. A drop down doesn't offer you those search capabilities. And then third is I can deselect all of these and have nothing selected, right? A drop down until a few weeks or months ago did not have this possibility, but now there is a new property and I can give you the exact name for it, which is blank value or allow empty selection. So if you just change this to true, a drop down will also allow you to have a blank selection or no selection. So that one particular point is where the drop down has come back to fight the battle with combo box. But there are still those two other properties of combo box, which is selecting multiple items and searching for items that a drop down doesn't have. And the cool thing about combo box is you can turn those two properties off. So if you really don't want users to search, and if you don't want users to select multiple items, you can turn those two properties of a combo box off, and then a combo box essentially becomes a drop down. So that's the biggest advantage of using a combo box. You can turn it into a drop down or use it as a combo box, but you cannot turn a drop down into a combo box. So if you ever have to choose between the two, my suggestion is to use a combo box rather than a drop down. Delegation, most interesting concept when it comes to Power Apps. So delegation is in very simple words, right? If you have a query, if you have an expression, delegation means that Power Apps will delegate the processing of the query to the data source and get back only the filtered results of that query. There are certain functions that are delegable to certain data sources. There is no data source that has all the functions delegable. So you always have to make sure that the expressions you write involve delegable functions depending on the data source that you're using. Now, there is an important concept related to delegation, which is the non-delegation limit. So if you go to your app, files, settings, and advanced settings, there is this data role limit for non-delegable queries. The default value is 500, and you can increase it up to 2000. I strongly suggest to not increase it to 2000 because of performance considerations. And the tip here, one of the tips here is to actually reduce that number from 500 to 1. And I'll tell you why. And one more thing before I get into this particular example is in the studio, there are multiple ways you can identify delegation warnings. So if there is a delegation warning, you will see a blue line in the formula bar, or you will see a triangle with an exclamation. And if you go to your app checker, and it will flag you warnings related to delegation. So then you must be thinking, why is identifying delegation so difficult if all of those will get flagged? The problem is not all delegation warnings get flagged by the app checker or anywhere in the studio for that matter. And here's an example. On the left hand side, I have a very simple gallery that basically shows me the list of all accounts that exist in this environment. And then on the right hand side, I have a slightly modified items property, which is I'm using the function add columns on the accounts entity, and I'm adding a new column, which is created by dot full name. So I can then search by the name of the user that created an account. Looks pretty simple. And if I go into the studio real quick, you will see that if I select this, there is no delegation warning here. There is no delegation warning here. And there is no delegation warning in the app checker as well. If that happens to be true, then the question is, why am I only seeing one account here? The answer is table shaping functions like add columns or drop columns are not delegable. Even if the expression inside those functions is delegable, the output of those table shaping functions is not. So although accessing an account's entity like on the left hand side gallery is delegable, once I use add columns, the output of that function is not delegable and it is limited by the delegation limit here, which is now set to 1, which is why I only see one account. Now, why should I set it to 1 when I'm creating an app? Is because right here using this example on the right hand side, if I would have had that limit set to 500, if this is my dev instance or test instance, I may not have more than 500 accounts. So when I would see the list of accounts in this gallery on the right hand side, nothing will tell me that I am actually running into delegation. So to prevent any such issues happening in your apps, set the limit to 1, because in almost every case, you will have more than one test record. Since I have at least 10 or 20 accounts here, and now the gallery on the right hand side comes up with just one account, I know for sure that there is a delegation issue here, which I need to fix. So set the limit to 1 to make delegation warnings more prominent. And then whenever you use functions like add columns or any other table shaping function, even if the delegation warnings don't get flagged, attention to those functions because you are actually running into delegation issues with those functions. So a lot of stuff there for delegation, but it's a very important concept. So I would strongly suggest paying attention to delegation warnings and issues when you are creating an app. Moving on to the next battle of controls, edit form versus display form. So if you have worked with Power Apps, you would know that there are two types of forms, display form and edit form. When do I use a display form versus when do I use a edit form? So a display form is nothing but what you see here on the left hand side. It can do just one thing. It can be used to display an existing record. Whereas an edit form can do three different things. It can be used to edit an existing record. Well, of course, because it's called edit form. It can also be used to create a new record, and it can also be used to view an existing record. So one edit form can actually do three different things, also including the one thing that a display form can do. Now, how do you do that? Is by calling these three different functions. New form, view form, edit form, and then you have the form name inside the parentheses. So if I click on view form, this becomes like a view form on the left hand side. And as you can see, if I try to click, I cannot click into these and I cannot edit. So this is essentially a view form. I can, of course, change the fill color of these controls to make it look exactly like the one on the left, but you get the idea. If I click on edit form, this becomes an editable form and I can now click here and make changes. And then when I save it, the record will get saved. If I click on new form, it blanks out the fields and this form is now ready for me to type in values to create a new record. So reusability is a very important concept because at the end of the day, you want to limit the number of controls you have in your app because of performance considerations and also because tomorrow you might have additional functionality that might crop up that you might want to add to your app. So the lesser the number of controls you have, the more possibility of extending the functionality in your app. So whenever you want to use a form, strongly suggest using an edit form versus a display form and then controlling the form mode to decide if you want to use it for creating a new record, viewing an existing record, or editing an existing record. Formulas. This is funny because when I started off with Power Apps, and it was obviously marketed as a low code, no code platform, I used to think that there will be, I don't know, about 20 or 15 or 30 different formulas, and that's it. Few months ago, I was looking at the formula reference Microsoft Doc. And the reason I was looking at that is because I was trying to create an app, which we will take a look into in the next couple of minutes, that will allow users to interact with each formula. So Microsoft Docs is awesome. It explains a lot about all functions. It gives you a lot of examples, gives you syntax. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't allow you to play with those functions, play with those formulas. So my idea was to create an app where a user can go in, select the formula that they want to play with, and actually even before that, search for a formula using not just the formula name, because if you know the formula name, well, you don't have to search for it. So if you, the good thing is you should be able to search a formula by using certain keywords. So for example, the rand function in Power Apps is used to create random numbers. I may not know that it exists. So if I should be able to search by the word random, and it should tell me that there is a function in Power Apps called rand, which will create a random number for you. And then once the user is able to search for a formula, they should be able to go in, plug in their own input values, and then see what the output is. Because once you see your own input getting modified by a formula, that's when you really know what the formula is doing. So because of all those reasons, because of the fact that I wanted to create that app, I decided to go and take a look at all the formulas that are available. And to my surprise, there were 173 formulas, at least at the time when I was creating the app. And I was blown away because I didn't know, honestly, at least 100 of them. So point here is if you have a need to write an expression, if you think there is no formula for that, strongly suggest go check Microsoft Docs or the app that I will be sharing, because more often than not, there is a formula that meets your needs. And then it struck me that that's the whole point about a low code platform, that a lot of things that you want to do are actually covered by the formulas that are available to your disposal. So do check out the Microsoft Docs for formula reference and the app that I will be sharing. And this is a sneak, I guess, preview, so to speak, of the app. And I'm going to launch it here. This should open up the formula reference app. Not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just want to show you some basic functionality. Like I said, I can actually search for a function. It gives me rand, and then I there is an illustration. Obviously, in the rand function, there is no input that a user has to plug in. But you can then click on this button and then keep clicking in to see that every time it generates a number that is random. And then it also gives you a link to the Microsoft Doc about that specific function. Because the truth is, there's no way I could have covered all that information right in that app. So if you want way more details than what is there in the app, click on the link, go to formula reference Microsoft Doc, and then read the rest about those expressions. But like here is another example where you can plug in your numbers and hit the shuffle function, and then it'll tell you what it actually does. So play around with this app. It's completely offline capable, so you can download it, on your phone or desktop and just play around with it whenever whenever you want to check if a particular formula exists or not. Okay, with that said, let's move on to the next one. Gallery versus data table, my third most favorite battle of controls in Power Apps. There is no single winner in this case. Both have their own advantages and disadvantages. So we'll take a look at those. Here is a gallery on the left hand side and a data table on the right hand side. Talking about galleries first, the first cool thing is you can add multiple controls inside a gallery. So as you can see, I have three different labels. I can add a date picker control. I can add a text input control. I can add a combo box. So I can add as many controls and any type of control inside a gallery, which I cannot do with a data table. Then the second thing is, now let's talk about an advantage for data tables. The cool thing about data tables is that they come with built-in headers. And as you can see, a gallery does not have headers. I can obviously add those headers by adding labels or buttons on top of this gallery, but I don't have to do that with the data table. It comes built in with headers. The second cool thing about data tables is that if the data table expands beyond the width of the data table, if the data expands beyond the width of the data table, it gives me a cool little horizontal scroll bar to look at some of the other data, which obviously is not possible with a gallery. If you are starting off with a vertical gallery, you only get a vertical scroll bar. If you start off with a horizontal gallery, then you get a horizontal scroll bar, but you cannot get both. And then another cool thing about galleries now is that you can select multiple records, whereas you cannot do that with a data table. Of course, you can, once you click on a record, you can add it to a collection and then capture multiple records that way. But a gallery makes it much easier. So those are some of the advantages and disadvantages of galleries and data tables. So whenever you have to make a pick, make sure you look at your particular use case, consider all the pros and cons, and then pick the one that works the best for you. Okay, moving on to the next one, hyperlinks. So from within your app, you can actually launch a couple of different things. One is you can launch a web page. Another is you can launch another app. And there are two different launch targets options that are available. One is new, another one is replace. When you use new, it opens that web page or that app in a new window. When you use replace, it replaces the app that you're launching this from. So if I go here, I'm not going to do replace because then the new app will replace this particular app. But if I click on this launch function, which uses launch target.new, it will launch the formula reference Microsoft Doc in a new browser window. So if you want to ever launch another Power App or a web page from within your app, you can use the launch function and make sure you evaluate whether you want to use the new launch target or the replace launch target. So moving on to another factor or consideration when making sure that you reuse your controls as much as possible, here is a quick little example. Now imagine there is a gallery. Imagine there are 5 columns and then there are 5 headers, one for each column. You want to allow users to select those headers or click on those headers to sort your gallery based on the particular header that is being clicked. Additionally, you also want users to change the sort order from ascending to descending and back. So what you might consider to do is you might have 2 icons, up and down arrow, for each header. So if there are 5 headers, you now have 10 controls. You can easily bring that down to 2 by simply using one down arrow and one up arrow, and by simply changing the X position of those icons based on the column header that is being clicked. So just by using that one property, just by making that one simple change, you can reduce the number of controls from 10 to 2. Now, how do you reduce that 2 to 1? Use either an up arrow or a down arrow, doesn't matter. Change its X position based on the header that is being clicked. But more importantly, based on the sort order, change its rotation. So if the default view is this, change it by 180 degrees based on the sort order. If it's ascending, keep it like this. If it's descending, switch it by 180 degrees. What happens when I do that? It keeps switching between up and down. So now if you go back to that same example where you had a gallery with 5 columns and 5 headers, allowing users to sort and in both ascending and descending order. You initially started off with 10 icons, which you brought it down to 2 by simply controlling the X position of the down and up arrow, which you were further able to bring it down to 1 by simply changing the rotation property of that icon. So the point being, whenever you are trying to use any control for that matter, try to check out as many properties as possible to make sure you are using the minimum number of controls, again for the same point, for performance and for making sure that there is room for expanding the functionality if the need arises in the future. Next is jump starting your Power Apps. So the whole idea about Power Apps is that it's a platform which allows you to build apps pretty quickly. How can you speed up that process even further is by using components. The cool thing about these is that they allow you to reuse them. You reuse certain standard controls or group of controls very easily, whether they are used multiple times within the same app or they are used across multiple apps. To give you an example of a very simple component that I created for this app, it is this particular right here, this particular canvas that you see in the middle. It's nothing but the background image and 3 different labels. So if I go back here and I go to components, and if I go here, if you look at this one, it literally has 1 image and 3 labels. When I initially looked at components, I got scared or I feared that components are very difficult. They are very fancy. While they can be fancy, they don't always have to be difficult. Here's a very simple example, right? Literally just 1 image and 3 labels gives me a component that basically makes my slide creation or screen creation process significantly easier. So if you look at any of the screens that I have here, each one of these has that particular component. And the way I'm changing the text on each screen is by adding 3 different properties here: header text, point 1 and point 2. And then on each screen, I'm specifying the values or the text that I want in those 3 labels. These are just the minimal properties that I've created for this component. There is no end to the number of properties you can create. For example, one more property here that I'm using is the header font size. I can change this to 24, 26, and I can have that differ from one screen to another. I could have even made font color a property. I could have even made font type a property. So here's a very quick example, right, of a very simple component that made the process of creating these screens super easy for me. Okay, moving on to the next one, keyboard mode. If you have used an app on your mobile phones, you might have noticed that depending on the field that you're tapping into, a different type of keyboard shows up. If you tapped into a field that is only supposed to accept digits, the numeric keyboard shows up. If you tap into a field where you're supposed to be allowed to type in both text and numbers, the standard keyboard shows up. So how do you implement that in a Power App is by using the virtual keyboard mode property of a text input control. So if I come here, the one on the left hand side is using virtual keyboard mode dot text property. This one uses numeric and the third one uses auto. Of course, on a desktop, it's not going to matter. But on a mobile device, when I click into this one, the standard keyboard would show up. And when I click on this one, a numeric one will show up. But beyond that, I want to show you one more property that can make a difference even on a desktop. So for that, I'm going to go to my screen, which is K, real quick, and then OK. So if I select this text input control, there is a property that's called format. Two options available, text and number. So what that does is Here, if I come in, I can type in everything. A number, a digit doesn't, an alphabet, anything is allowed. If I come here and I try to type in text, you can see that it doesn't let me do it. If I type in numbers, it accepts that. However, one thing to keep in mind is even if you are using, like in this one, you're using the format to be number, it will allow you to type in the percentage symbol. And the reason why it's important to keep that in mind is because if you are simply assuming that since you have set the format to number, you will not have any characters. And you might take in the text property of this control or the text output of this control to patch a record with a numeric value. And since it allows you to type in a percentage symbol, you might receive an error. So keep in mind that even if you keep the format to numeric, you will or number, it will still allow you to type in the percentage symbol. And if you want to use this to patch a data source which only accepts numbers, make sure you trim or remove this percentage symbol from the text output of this text input control. Next is last submit. Whenever you use a form to create a record, you can use the last submit property to get the complete record of that newly created record, to get the complete details of the newly created record. And the reason why that's important is because you can then use that to display a confirmation message. So for example, I might have a user plug in a name and create a new record, but then I might want to show the unique ID that was assigned to this particular record. So the way I can do that is by using last submit to fetch the ID of the newly created record. So if I go here, I'm going to enter my name, and this is the function that I'm calling on this button. So submit form, which will create a new record, and then I'm doing form2.last submit and storing it in a variable. And then I'm basically just displaying a confirmation using that variable. So if I click here, it says new record has been created. The ID is 25. If I do that again, it tells me that new record has been created. The ID is 26. So last submit actually gives you quick access to the complete record that was just created by the submit form call. So use that to get that complete record and then get access any property to display any information that you might want to in a confirmation message. Next is media controls. And before I move on to the next screen, I want to tell you a couple of points. There are two types of properties for two properties in consideration here. One is the auto start property. You can set that to true or false. Strongly suggest setting that to false because otherwise what will happen is, and what you will see on the next slide is if you set it to true, as soon as the user navigates to that screen, that media control will start playing, which may or may not be that bad an idea. But if I'm using an app, I always like to have control over when I want to start a video versus having a video that starts automatically when I navigate to a screen. So that's one property. Then we'll talk about the other one on the other slide. So the one on the left here has auto start set to true, which is why as soon as I moved to this particular screen, that video started playing. Whereas the one on the right hand side has this property set to false. The way I can start this video is by simply clicking on it, and it should begin the video. The thing that is important here is auto start false is cool, but there is one cool thing about the video on the left hand side than the video on the right hand side. And that is I see different controls here. I see the play button. I see the scroll bar to move the video to a particular point. I see the volume control and I see whether I want to make this full screen or not. And that particular one is controlled by same thing here. There is another property that's called show controls. So that one is set to true for the one on the left, which is why you see all these beautiful controls. For this one, show controls is set to false, which is why you don't see it. And the user If the user doesn't know that they can simply start the video by clicking on this piece, they would basically not figure out how to start this video or how to pause it, which is by clicking on it again. And then there's no way they can actually change it to full screen and or control the volume and control or move, take the video to a particular point. So if you have a media control, set the auto start property to true and set the auto start property to false and set the show controls property to true. Next is new screens. Again, going back to the concept that Power Apps is all about creating apps quickly. If you are adding new screens, there are a lot of screen templates that are available. So when you go to new screen, you see options here which differ if you are using a phone layout versus a tablet layout. So look at these options, look at some of the ones because they might be very useful for you. For example, the list screen is pretty cool when you know your screen has to have a header and a gallery. So instead of then adding a label and then a gallery, simply choose this template screen to speed up the process. Similarly, when you're creating an app, there are a lot of templates available. And while some of these templates may not be apps that you can actually take further and expand upon, you can always draw inspiration from some of the ideas in there, like look and feel or how a certain piece of code was implemented. And you never know, you might actually use one of these apps to go ahead and expand or customize them to create your own app. And to give you an example, we had a customer that needed an app for ticket or case management. And we showed them the service desk template, which is right here, just to give them an idea of what's doable and what's not. They liked it so much that we ended up using this, literally this particular template, modifying just very minor things like color scheme and such. And then this was one of the fastest Power Apps we created, which was made possible only because of the fact that we started off with a template. So when you're creating an app, do check out some of the templates that are available and definitely check out the screen templates that are available before you start adding controls to your screens. Next is OnStart Property. So there are a lot of things that you can do in the OnStart property. For example, if there's anything, any variable, any collection that you want throughout your app, it's a good idea to call those functions in the app's OnStart property. And I'll give you an example of what I have here. I'm declaring a couple of variables, global font color and global fill color, because every control that I add in my app, I just want to set the font color to be this. And instead of typing this every now and then, I'm simply declaring it in the app's onStart property. And another reason why that makes this easier or a good idea is because if I ever want to come in and change the color scheme, I can just come in, change the value once, run the app's onStart, and then see how the new color scheme looks. One thing to keep in mind when adding a lot of functions to an app's onStart property is to make sure that you group as many of those calls or as many of those functions as possible in the concurrent function so as to not overload your apps on start and not have the user wait to get to their first screen. Of course, not all functions can be grouped together in the concurrent function, but do try to use or group as many functions as possible in the concurrent function in your apps on start property. Next is pretty cool. Phone camera. If you are using the camera control, there is one cool property that I didn't know for a long time, which gives you access to all the available cameras on your device. So right now I'm on my Surface, and I didn't know that there are more than two cameras on my device. So if I go to the next screen, the way you can do that is all this gallery is doing is right here. So if I go back to my app and I go to this, the items property of this gallery is simply camera dot available devices. So with this one simple call, I'm getting the list of all devices, all cameras that are available on this device. So there is obviously a webcam. And then if I click on this, there is the front camera. Then there is a rear camera, which obviously will show literally just my wall right now. Then there is another cool one which I didn't know existed, which is the IR camera, which is used for logging in and authentication. So by doing this, you can present the list of devices that are available to a user so they can choose the one that they want. And the another reason why that's important is because in some phones, camera control 0 is not the same as camera control 1. In some phones, 0 is the front camera. In some phones, 0 is the rear camera. So if you hard code it to a certain value, you will basically have your users stuck with a particular camera, which in some cases might work, in some cases it may not. So by doing this, you are allowing users to pick the camera that they want, especially on mobile devices where there are at least two cameras, a selfie camera and a rear camera. So use camera dot available devices to get the list of available cameras on your particular device.
So here, like certain cameras, certain mobiles, they have three cameras, four cameras. So it will not differentiate between all them four, right? Three or four. It will be either back or front. Or,
It so I actually use this on my phone, and my phone has three cameras on the back, and it actually shows those three cameras as separate cameras.
okay.
So it literally shows you basically every lens that is available as a camera option, and you can
Okay.
like go even granular than what you can actually do on your phone directly if you use the phone's camera control.
Right.
So if you have a phone on which you want to check and you see there are multiple cameras on the rear, create a very simple one screen app, add a gallery, set its item property to camera dot available, whatever that is,
Yes. Yeah.
camera dot available devices, and you will then see the list of all cameras that are available on your phone. Like even honestly, even on this laptop, I was surprised that there were four different cameras that were available. Of course, webcam is understandable, but yes, it'll go down to that level of detail and present you multiple options.
Okay. Great.
Awesome. So moving on to the next one, quotation marks. And this is something that trips a lot of people who are just getting started with Power Apps. And the question is, when do I use single quotes and when do I use double quotes? So it's actually pretty simple. Whenever you want to write some text, whenever you want to populate certain property with some text, you use double quotes. And you use single quotes when you have an identifier that has space or special characters in it. For example, the second one is a very good example that uses both. I'm doing a very simple lookup on the user's entity. I want the user whose primary email is my email. So primary email field has a space in its name. So I have to wrap it inside single quotes. And then my email address is text. So I have it inside double quotes. And then full name is another identifier that has a space in it. So I have that wrapped in single quotes as well. So it's pretty simple. Whenever you have text that goes in double quotes, whenever you have an identifier that has space or any other special characters, that goes in single quotes. With that, next is the reset function. This is one of the most asked questions on the community forums, which is how do I reset a gallery or how do I have a gallery that doesn't select any record by default? There is a default property for the gallery control, and if you leave it blank the way it comes out of the box, it actually selects the first control by default. So here is an example of a gallery where the default property is blank, and I'm going to select a different row and then call the reset function. It goes back to selecting the first record. So let's say I have this and I do reset. It again scrolls up and selects the first record by default. In some cases, it might be um, a behavior that is acceptable, but it may not be in certain cases. In some cases, you may want a gallery to not select any record. So how do you do that is by populating the default property with these curly brackets and nothing inside them. And then, as you can see right now, there's nothing selected by default. If I select an account and I call the reset function, it doesn't have any record selected. If I select Adventure Works and I call the reset function, nothing is selected by default. So if you ever want your gallery to get reset and select no record, populate its default property using the curly brackets. Save your app sounds pretty obvious, but it's, trust me, it has happened to me enough number of times that I thought it's pretty important to share. Couple of things. Obviously, one is when you are creating an app and saving it for the first time, the first save also publishes the app. Beyond that, you have to save and publish separately. But what is important is when you start creating an app, and depends on how you are starting it. So for example, if I go here and I say create canvas app from blank, it prompts me for an app name. But if I'm here and I go canvas app, it doesn't actually ask me to give a name. So it doesn't save an app, and it actually takes you inside the studio. You can start adding controls, adding screens, start creating your app without actually saving it. As you can see here, it says app. And if you go significantly down the process of creating your app and something happens that you lose this window, none of your changes will be saved. So to avoid that from happening, always give the app an app name and save it before you start adding controls to your app. And the reason why beyond that it becomes easy is because if you go to file and then you go to account, there is an option here which is auto save. It basically saves your changes every 2 minutes. In most cases, this will be set to on, but always a good idea to make sure that this is set to on, because in this case, if this control is set to on, my app will be saved every 2 minutes. So the worst that can happen is I can lose the changes that I did in the last minute and 50 seconds, as an example. So save your app as soon as you start creating an app, and then make sure the auto save property is set to true or on. Table function is actually pretty cool. It allows you to define ad hoc tables within your app. And the reason why that's important is because you can use that to populate, say, drop downs or galleries. And an example of that I have here is a gallery type filter control. I can use this to filter the different records I might have on a gallery on the right hand side based on their status. And let's say there are three different possible values: open, closed, and inactive. I then created a table with literally four text values, all open, closed, and inactive. And then the gallery on the right hand side can have its items property based to filter on the value that is selected on this particular gallery. So very simple table function that populates a gallery with four different values now gives me a filter gallery that I can use as a filter to filter my other gallery. Next is the user function. When you are creating an app, it's a good idea, at least in some cases, to show certain information about the user that's logged in. And the way you can access that information very easily is by using the user function. It gives you access to three values: the name of the current logged in user, the email of the current logged in user, and an image of the current logged in user. So if I go to this next screen, it gives me this email address, gives me my name, and it gives me my image as well. So a lot of places where I've seen this being used is, say, on the left bottom corner or the top right corner, we have a small image of the user that's logged in because it gives a nice personal touch to a user that is accessing an app. So if you want these three basic pieces of information, you don't have to go to the user's entity or any other data source for that matter to get these details. Simply use the user function to get the email address, name, and an image of the current logged in user. Variables. So there are two types of variables: global and context. In very simple terms, global variable is one that is available throughout your app, and context or local variable is one that is typically available only on the screen that it was created or initialized. I say typically because there are certain ways you can have a local or context variable pass from one screen to another, like from within the navigate function. But typically, local variables or context variables are confined to the screen. And to give you an example here, the way you would declare global variables is by using the set function, and the way you would declare a context variable is by using the update context function. The thing to keep in mind, though, although you should never do that, is if you have two variables, one global and one context with the same name, if you then try to access the variable with the variable name, you will actually get the value of the context variable, not the global variable. And then how do you go about accessing the value of the global variable is by using the disambiguation operator. So the at symbol and then the variable name will give you access to the global variable, whereas just the variable name will give you access to the local variable if you have a local and global variable with the same name. But like I said, I cannot think of a use case where that should happen. But this was a question that came up on the community forums, that they had a local and global variable with the same name and they were not able to access the value of the global variable with just the variable name. So don't do that. But if you do, access the global variable using the disambiguation operator. Wrap count is another property of galleries that isn't used a lot. It's pretty powerful because it allows you to have it allows you to have a vertical gallery with multiple columns or a horizontal gallery with multiple rows. So to give you an example of that, I have a very simple vertical gallery with a default wrap count of 1. If I select 2, it now has 2 columns. If I change this to 3, there are 3. If I change this to 4, there are 4. So wrap count can make a gallery look very different based on the need. And this becomes especially useful when you're trying to create responsive apps where, depending on the screen width, you might want to change the wrap count to better utilize the space and make the look and feel much better and improve the user experience based on the device that they're using to access the app. Next, I'm going to cover X and Y together. X and Y obviously control the X and Y positions of controls. Typically, you would populate X and Y with static values or fixed values like 100 and 150. That's cool. But if you want to make responsive apps, you want to make sure that your X and Y properties of every control is relative to either the size of another control or relative to the position of another control. So by making sure the X and Y positions are relative, you can make an app that is responsive. Again, there are definitely more things that you want to do to make an app responsive. This is one of the most basic concepts to start making an app responsive. And similarly, not just X and Y, right? Width and height of a control should also be relative to make an app responsive. And I have a very simple, crude example of a slightly responsive app, which is, I'm going to drag this one out and then go back to that screen. So here's an example, literally 3 different buttons. Their width and height are relative to other controls to the screen. And what it does is it makes these controls adapt to the screen size. So whether it's width or height that is changing, the app will always look the same. I haven't modified the X and Y positions in this app, but the idea is the same. You can modify X position, Y position, width, and height, and keep them relative to make an app responsive, or at least start the process of making an app responsive. And then last is Z or Z. Um, I was able to get to Y pretty easily. When I got to Z, I was trying my best to figure out a property that I could share or a tip that I could share. The one that I could come up with is the Z property that is available within the acceleration signal in Power Apps. There are 3 different signals that are available: location, compass, and acceleration. And these are all available for you to use on your mobile devices. Now, what do these 3 indicate? If you use the location signal, it gives you access to the latitude, longitude, and altitude. So they answer the question of where the user is. If you use the degrees signal, it tells you where you are headed and what direction. If you use the acceleration signal, acceleration dot x, y, and z, it tells you how fast you are moving. This actually tells you exactly where I am right now. These are the coordinates of my house in Houston, Texas. I am obviously not headed anywhere. I'm static. I'm sitting on a chair. And then it's not going to tell me how fast I'm moving because, well, even if I would have been moving right now, the app is being accessed through a desktop. But if I open the same app on my phone, you would see that the degrees value and the acceleration XYZ values change as soon as I start moving. So a lot of cool features that are available. These three signals can add a lot of values, especially when you're creating an app for mobile devices. So do check these out and see if there is a use case in which you can make use of these three signals. And with that, that is the end of all the tips I wanted to cover today. Of course, there are many more that I can cover, but given the duration and given the time that we had on our hands today, these were the ones I wanted to cover. So, any questions? Let me know.
So as of now, we don't have any questions, Hardit. But the
Okay.
one when you started, there was like a background image,
Yes.
and it can be set as a fit, as you had mentioned. So that is a one way that we can make the images, or at least that particular gallery, as a responsive, right? If we use that particular method.
Correct, correct. Because then it becomes a part of the screen. So as long as your screen is responsive, that image will adjust as well.
Exactly. So that will become a relative, right?
Correct.
Okay, great. So guys, do you have any questions? Hardit, it was really insightful session. As you already said during the session that some of were new to you as well, and most
Mhm.
of were new to us as well here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely want to share a couple of things. I can share this app as well. But at least for now, I want to share a couple of links. One is a link to the Formula app that I was showing in the middle of the session,
Yep.
and then second is, if it's a MS app file. So if you don't happen to know how to import that, which I didn't know until a few days ago, I have another article that explains how to import a MS app file. So I want to share those couple of links here real quick.
Sure, please. That will help.
Yeah, I found that Formula app to be pretty useful because literally when I'm creating an app, I keep this one open on like another tab. And then as soon as I run into a situation where I need to explore what functions are available, I just come here, search for it, and then see what the function does and then use it in my app.
Right. So you must be updating this one whenever there is a new formulas coming up.
Yes, yes, yes. So sometimes I hope that the Power Apps team comes up with new formulas, but then at the same time, I think as soon as they'll come up with a new formula, I'll have to update the app. So it's one of those things that is both good
Yes.
and bad.
There's a continuous
But yeah,
development you have to do. Yeah.
yeah, I was hoping to get access or have an API that would somehow give me that new formulas information and then have the app updated automatically. But that
No.
doesn't exist today. I'm definitely not the smartest guy to create a new API. So if somebody who's listening right now can create one, I'll be more than happy to use it.
Let's see. I think that is a static pages which they create. There is no direct API as such.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep hitting the page if you find a new formula, and
Yes.
then yeah, if I don't even know if that's doable, but if yes, I'll be indebted to the person who creates that.
Exactly. Thank you, Adit, for a wonderful session. And here we are completing our Global Bizapps Day. It's been 25 hours now. We started, and all the sessions were wonderful. And thank you, all the presenters, on behalf of Champs. Uh, I'll just stop the recording and then we can get into a chat session for a couple of minutes.